All right, so there are some changes afoot in terms of the way we live life in the United States. And most likely won't be long before we'll be walking down the street or in our backyards, and we can look up into the sky and say, it's a bird, it's a plane. No, it's a drone. Hard to say when and where it actually started, but we can follow parts of the paper trail. In February, Congress passed a bill requiring the Federal Aviation Administration to open up national airspace to unmanned civil and commercial aircraft by 2015. The bill gives funding to the FAA and assigns the FAA the task of coming up with plans to make this all happen. Then just last week, the FAA announced a new set of rules. Essentially, they're saying they're going to make it easier and faster for government entities to obtain a certificate of authorization. I'll just read you one line from the FAA website. It says if the FAA disapproves a COA, the agency quickly addresses the questions from the applicant and tries to provide alternate solutions that will lead to approval. So the bottom line is they're here to stay. But what will they be used for? And to what extent will privacy be taken into consideration when some of these local governments sign up for permission to use drones in their jurisdictions? Trevor Tim is an activist with the Electronic Frontier Foundation and hopefully will help us answer some of these questions. Hey there, Trevor. I know you just wrote about this, and you found that there's actually some local governments stepping in, trying to ensure that these drones will be used simply for their intended purposes. First of all, talk about what those intended purposes are and also what some of these local governments are saying.
Sure. So, I mean, the real problem with drones, or surveillance drones, at least in the U.S., would be the massive privacy violations they could end up causing, because these drones obviously have high-definition cameras. They can stay flying for hours or days at a time, and they could be attached with cameras that can sense infrared light or heat or chemicals even. And so there are many different ways that Americans' privacy can be violated. And so what we're seeing is that actually local governments are taking the lead on this issue. The FAA hasn't mentioned anything about privacy in any of their statements, even though they're streamlining the process for law enforcement agencies. And Congress really hasn't talked about this issue either. But local governments, city councils, are actually fighting back against these proposals. For example, in Seattle, it's probably the best example. The police chief actually had to go in front of city council and apologize for not keeping the city council informed about its drone program, which they found out about actually through our lawsuit against the FAA instead of through official channels. And now that they actually are considering a binding ordinance that could put a stop to surveillance, or at least put up robust privacy safeguards that would keep people from being spied on.
So at least some of these people are actually saying, you know, before we vote on this, we want to make sure that you have, you know, people's privacy in mind. I think that's a good thing. It's really shocking, though, Trevor, when you look at how many drones are going to be used. According to the FAA, by 2020, so less than 10 years from now, there could be as many as 30,000 drones in the United States. Talk a little bit more about this push by you guys, by the EFF, to get local governments to step in.
Sure. Well, like I said, it's really been tough to get Congress to pass any sort of privacy legislation lately. And in fact, they've been passing legislation like CISPA, the new cybersecurity bill that actually hurts Americans' privacy. So we're really worried that they may not act fast enough for when these drones become prevalent. After all, there's 19,000 law enforcement agencies in the U.S., and many of them are getting grants from the Justice Department or Department of Homeland Security to get these drones basically for free. And with the dangerous capabilities of them, who knows how it could turn out. So what we want to do is focus on local governments, because they're the ones that really have oversight over police departments. They can pass binding ordinances. They can have real oversight into how these drones are used. Another great example is what happened last week in Shelby County, Tennessee, a similar situation to Seattle, where they were actually about to buy 2 drones for their police department. And all of a sudden, the county commissioner started raising questions. They asked them what they were going to be using them for, and they wanted to institute privacy standards. And then all of a sudden, the sheriff's office backed off and said, actually, in fact, we're not going to buy them now. And to their credit, the Shelby County Commissioner's Office actually is going to go ahead and possibly pass binding ordinances about privacy, even though their police department isn't immediately getting drones. So that's a great sign, and hopefully we can see more of that in the days to come.
And I know you guys did a little bit of digging and found that, there's a long list of agencies that have already, been approved to use these unmanned aerial vehicles. I know we've already talked about this on this show, about colleges that have gotten permission, that they're actually adding programs as part of their curriculum. But I did want to put a few up. I want to put a map up. This map basically shows all the sites that the FAA acknowledges as active domestic drone authorizations. Now, the agency confirmed that there were about 300 of them, and it's issued between 700 and 750 authorizations since the program actually began back in 2006. And I'll just name a few of the schools: Texas A&M, the University of Colorado, and the University of Connecticut. And then there's also some other departments: the Department of Energy in Idaho, the Miami-Dade Police Department, and the city of Harrington, Kansas. So these are just a few examples. Talk a little bit about why some of these schools are taking on, wanting the ability to use drones in their airspace, and also some of these, very small cities in this country.
Mm-hmm. Well, first, the universities and kind of uses for drones that actually may not be malicious or invade people's privacy. There are legitimate uses for drones. I mean, police office or law enforcement agencies can use them for search and rescue operations, or fighting wildfires where people couldn't get, or mapping natural disasters. They could even be used for journalism. And so I think that's what a lot of these universities are exploring. And as far as who actually owns drones right now, we actually had to file a lawsuit against the FAA because they were keeping all that information secret, even though manned airplanes and aircraft have to be are posted automatically and are transparent about who's operating them. For some reason, they weren't doing the same thing for drones. So we just got this information back a few weeks ago. And as you said, there's a lot of small law enforcement agencies across the country that actually have these drones, many of which they got, like I said, from Homeland Security money. And the good part is that a lot of cities actually ban these any sort of flying object from flying over buildings and such. So the Miami-Dade County police office actually has 2 drones, but they're not allowed to fly them within city limits. So that really limits the surveillance that can be done on people in cities, and hopefully that trend will continue.
Oh, and there's some new requirements out as well for the FAA, and those are set to get started later this year. And these are for agencies working in the government public safety realms. As long as they follow the rules, they must be given permission to operate any small drones. And we're talking drones about 4.5 pounds. I guess, Trevor, that's almost more frightening to me. I mean, these tiny drones, will people even know that they're out there?
Yeah, drones come in all shapes and sizes. We kind of picture them as these huge planes, given what we've heard about over in Afghanistan and Pakistan and elsewhere. But they actually can come much smaller than that. There are bird-like drones that fly around that are the size of a person's wingspan. There are hummingbird drones that DARPA just actually demonstrated. And soon drones will be even smaller, that can fit in the palm of your hand, or maybe not even see them. So the technology is expanding rapidly. And it's important that we get privacy safeguards set before all of these law enforcement agencies start using them, or at that point it might be too late. If their policies are set in stone and they can basically use them however they wish without privacy safeguards, then it'll be a lot harder to stop in the courts and Congress. So what we need to do is go to local governments right now and ask them, before their police stations get drones, that they institute privacy safeguards or ban surveillance outright, because that's really the best way we can stop this.
All right. Well, we certainly appreciate you keeping us updated on all these, new regulations that are being passed in our Congress. A whole lot of people are not talking about it. Trevor Timm, activist with the Electronic Frontier Foundation.